The alien SOS in the distant reaches of space, far from any known star systems. A small and desperate alien race was on the brink of extinction. Their planet, once thriving with life and culture, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The enemy forces that had attacked them were far too strong, their technology far too advanced. The alien species had fought valiantly, but they were no match for their ruthless invaders. The planet was burning, cities reduced to ashes, and the once vibrant lands were now poisoned by the enemy's weapons. Desperation had settled in. Their leaders, in a final act of survival, decided to send out a message, a cry for help. It wasn't just a message to their allies, for they had none. No one had come to their aid before. This was a last-ditch effort, a signal sent into the void of space, hoping against all odds that someone, anyone, would hear it. The message was simple, and it was urgent. SOS, we are on the brink of annihilation. Our world is lost, and our people are dying. Please help us. The signal was broadcast on all frequencies, across every known channel they could access. The alien species knew that this call was a gamble. There was no guarantee that anyone would respond, but they had no choice. If no one came, their people would perish, and their civilization would be erased from the galaxy. As the transmission went out, the alien leaders gathered in their last remaining stronghold, a crumbling citadel deep within their planet's largest city. They had nothing left to lose. They could only wait in silence, praying that the message would reach someone who could help. The planet's defenses were failing, and it wouldn't be long before the invaders would finish the job. Hours passed with no response. The alien leaders grew restless, their hopes waning with each passing minute. Was there truly no one out there? Was this a mistake? Their fear was palpable. The echoes of destruction could be heard outside the citadel walls, bombs falling, explosions shaking the ground, the sound of their world's final moments. The desperation in the room grew, and yet their hopes remained flickering, barely holding on. Then something changed. A soft beat broke the silence. One of the communication officers, who had been working tirelessly at a console, looked up with wide eyes. The officer's hands trembled as they reached for the controls. A signal had been received, a response. The officer quickly adjusted the equipment, amplifying the incoming transmission. It wasn't clear at first, just static, a few random bursts of noise, but then a voice came through. Distant yet distinct. This is the Deathworlder fleet. We have received your signal. Stand by for instructions. The words sent a shockwave of relief and fear through the alien leaders. Someone had heard their SOS, someone had responded. But the name Deathworlder fleet meant nothing to them. The name was unfamiliar, but the tone was authoritative, cold. It sounded like power. It sounded like war. The communication officer immediately sent a follow-up message. Who are you? What do you want? The voice on the other end was calm, almost indifferent. We are the Deathworlder fleet, came the reply. You have called for help. We answer. Prepare for our arrival. There was no more explanation, no further questions answered. The communication ended abruptly, and the room was plunged back into silence. The alien leaders exchanged uncertain glances. Who were the Deathworlders? Were they allies, or was this another force arriving to finish what the invaders had started? The name, though powerful, was foreign and its meaning was unclear. What should we do now? One of the leaders asked. We've been abandoned by everyone else. Could they really be here to help us? Another leader spoke up, her voice laced with fear. We have no choice. We've already sent out the call. We must trust that they will do as they say. The days that followed were filled with anxious waiting. The alien species, battered and broken, held their breath as they waited for the Deathworlder fleet to arrive. The skies above them were filled with the sounds of the invaders' attacks, each day bringing them closer to total annihilation. Their once thriving civilization was now reduced to rubble, and yet, in the midst of this destruction, a glimmer of hope appeared. As the fleet's rival drew near, the alien leaders gathered once more in the Citadel's war room. Their planet was dying, their people were suffering, but now, perhaps, help had arrived. They could only hope that the Deathworlders, whoever they were indeed the salvation they so desperately needed. But there was something else in the air, a growing unease. The Deathworlder fleet had responded, but were they truly here to help, or had they come to impose their own rule? To conquer this broken world as the invaders had done before, the alien species could only wait, uncertain of what the future would hold. The waiting continued. The final hours ticked by, and the alien leaders couldn't shake the feeling that the arrival of the Deathworlders would change everything, not just for their planet, but for the galaxy itself. And so, with the very survival of their race on the line, they waited. The SOS had been answered. But now, they would learn what kind of help the Deathworlders would bring and whether their world could survive the consequences. The Deathworlder fleet responds. Attention among the alien leaders grew as the hours passed. The sky above their planet, once filled with the chaos of explosions and the wailing sirens of their failing defenses, had quieted somewhat. The only sound now was the low hum of their fading communications equipment, and the distant rumble of enemy warships in orbit. Yet, despite the chaos, there was a flicker of something more, an uneasy anticipation. The Deathworlder fleet was coming. But what kind of help had they promised? The alien leaders couldn't shake the feeling that the help they had called for might not be the salvation they envisioned. They had no idea who or what the Deathworlders were, only that they had answered their SOS. As the minutes stretched into hours, the alien fleet continued its assault. The invaders, sensing that their prey was weakened, were now closing in for the final blow. They had no idea that the very thing they had been trying to destroy was about to receive a force far more terrifying than themselves. Deep within the command room, the alien leaders watched the sensors. The bright red dots on the display, marking the incoming Deathworlder fleet, grew closer. They had heard the name Deathworlder fleet before, whispered among the galaxy's most feared factions, but no one knew exactly what it meant. The fearsome reputation of the fleet echoed through the corners of space, but its true nature was a mystery. Their ships, they're huge, muttered one of the officers, eyes wide with disbelief. The incoming fleet was no mere fleet of ships, it was an armada, and it was growing by the minute. The lead commander, an alien leader named Kalia, stood up, her furrowed brow betraying her anxiety. Activate our planetary defenses. We will give them the benefit of the doubt for now, but we must be prepared. If they turn on us, we will fight until the last ship falls. There was a pause as the crew scrambled to put their defensive systems into place. The alien leaders exchanged nervous glances, still unsure of the Deathworlders' true intentions. They had sent their SOS with the hope that someone would answer, but now, as the fleet's warships materialized on the screens, they could feel the weight of their decision. Within moments, the incoming fleet's leader transmitted a direct message. The screen flickered, showing an imposing alien figure, tall, strong, and covered in what appeared to be battle armor. The voice that came through was cold, efficient, and full of authority. "This is Captain Gur of the Deathworlder fleet," the voice boomed. "Your signal has been received. You requested help, and we are here. Do not mistake our arrival. As mercy, we are here to deliver a swift and brutal solution to your enemy." The alien leaders held their breath, each of them unsure how to respond. Gur's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The fleet's arrival wasn't a simple rescue operation. It was something far more dire. Kalia, the alien leader, hesitated before speaking. "What do you mean by a swift and brutal solution? We have been under attack by a superior enemy. We have no power left to fight. Please, we need protection, not destruction." Captain Gur's expression didn't change. His eyes, sharp and calculating, reflected nothing but indifference. "You misunderstand," he said slowly. "You called for help, but the only way to survive this war is to show your enemy what true power looks like. You need more than defense. You need strength that will crush their will to fight." As Gur spoke, the alien leaders began to understand. The Deathworlders didn't come to protect or to save, they came to dominate, to overwhelm. The choice had never been theirs. The Deathworlders were not allies in the traditional sense, they were conquerors, bound only by the terms they set. They would not come as the saviors the aliens had hoped for. They would come as the force of nature that bent the galaxy to their will. Kalia's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. "But we are not warriors. We are civilians, struggling to survive. We cannot fight this enemy in the way you suggest." Gur's response was chillingly calm. "Then you will perish." The transmission ended. The room was silent as the weight of Gur's words sank in. The alien leaders stood in stunned silence, their worst fears confirmed. The Deathworlders had not come to defend their planet, they had come to give them a brutal lesson in power, whether the aliens liked it or not. They were now part of the Deathworlder agenda. "Prepare the planet for their arrival," Kalia ordered, her voice no longer filled with hope but resignation. "We must face them head on. The Deathworlders will not fight for us. They will fight for their own purposes." As the Deathworlder fleet neared, the alien defenders turned their attention to the sky. They were helpless, standing at the mercy of the fleet that loomed above them. But even now, deep down, there was a strange feeling of relief. They had sent the SOS, and someone had answered. But now, they had to face the fact that the help they had called for might have been the very thing that sealed their fate. The first ships of the Deathworlder fleet broke through the planet's atmosphere. They were massive, with imposing weapons mounted along their sides, their armored hulls glowing with intense energy. The fleet was overwhelming in size and scale, a sight that left the alien leaders breathless. As the ships touched down on the surface, a deep rumble echoed across the world, shaking everything in its path. The Deathworlders had arrived in full force. The ground trembled beneath them as the fleet prepared to unleash its fury. The alien leaders could only watch as the Deathworlder warships landed. They were no longer in control. The war they had fought so hard to survive was about to become their final battle, and the Deathworlders would lead the charge. Arrival of the Deathworlder. Massive warships of the Deathworlder fleet slowly descended. Their massive engines, humming with a low, bone-rattling vibration that reverberated through the planet's atmosphere. Each ship, colossal and menacing, cast a long shadow over the alien cities below as they landed. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the impact sending shockwaves through the alien stronghold. The deathly silence that followed the initial blast was almost worse than the destruction itself inside the command center. The alien leaders stood frozen, their eyes glued to the holographic display showing the fleet's movements. Kalia's heart raced, her fingers tightened around the console. As if trying to steady the chaos within her mind, they had called for help. And now that the Deathworlders had arrived, everything felt different. The sky above had darkened with the shadows of the fleet's descent, but in the pits of her stomach, Kalia felt something far darker, something akin to dread. "We've never seen anything like this." One of the officers muttered, "These ships are enormous, far beyond anything we could have prepared for. Do they intend to destroy us?" Another asked nervously. Kalia's gaze remained fixed on the screen. She had to make a choice. They had called for help, but the help they had received was not what they had imagined. This wasn't the relief of rescue, it was a storm about to crash down upon them. A sharp voice broke through her thoughts. "Commander Kalia, the Deathworlder fleet is asking for a direct transmission. They demand to speak with you." Her breath caught in her chest, but she nodded resolutely. She had no choice but to comply. The time for hesitation had long passed. The hologram flickered. And there, standing before her in cold, unforgiving clarity, was Captain Gur. His armor was dark and forbidding, his expression stern and unreadable. In the cold, dim light of the transmission, Gur looked more like a shadow than a person. His piercing eyes seemed to hold all the secrets of a species that had mastered survival at any cost. "Commander Kalia," he said, his voice carrying a chilling edge of authority. "The fleet has arrived. The time for your planet's defense has ended. The war is over. It is now our war." Kalia's stomach churned as the weight of his words sank. She had hoped the Deathworlders would be here to defend her people. Instead, they were here to end the conflict, hand not just with the enemy, but with her species as well. "We've sent our best forces to your enemy's base of operations," Captain Gur continued, "but understand this, Commander, we do not fight for you. We fight because we are hunters. Your enemy is our prey. And this galaxy will learn that we are not to be underestimated." Kalia clenched her fists, trying to steady her nerves. "What do you want from us, Captain? You said you would help. How are we supposed to survive this if you're just here to kill?" Ngur's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a cold, humorless smile. "You will not survive as you were. Your race is weak, your world is dying. You will survive through strength, or you will perish with your enemy. If you wish to live, you will bow to the power that you have summoned." Kalia's voice shook, but she forced herself to respond. "We never asked for conquest. We asked for help. You cannot simply destroy us." The Deathworlder captain remained silent for a moment, his gaze cold and impassive. "You do not understand, Commander. The help you called for was not to save your people. It was to bring an end to the weak and the foolish. You are not the first, and you will not be the last, to make the mistake of calling upon us. Now, you will see what true power is. The Deathworlders will make your world ours." The transmission cut out, leaving an oppressive silence hanging in the command center. The officers in the room looked at one another with confusion and fear, while Kalia's heart sank. This was no rescue mission, it was a punishment. The Deathworlders were not here to save her people. They had arrived to assert their dominance outside. The ground rumbled again, this time with a far greater force as the Deathworlder fleet began its assault. Massive warships fired beams of destructive energy into the air, crashing down on enemy positions. The sky above erupted into flames as the Deathworlder's firepower decimated everything in its path. There was no mercy, no room for negotiation, only raw, overwhelming power. As the battle raged on, Kalia watched in horror as her planet was torn apart. Her people had no choice but to watch the deadly efficiency of the Deathworlders as they obliterated the alien forces. The invaders were being pushed back, but the cost was greater than anyone could have imagined. The Deathworlder fleet's ships moved like predators across the landscape, each step crushing everything beneath them. But Kalia knew that the true threat lay not in the battle itself but in what would come afterward. The Deathworlders would leave nothing behind but a hollow shell of what her planet had once been. And the question that haunted her now was clear: when the battle was won, would the Deathworlders still have a place for her people, or had their world been abandoned, a casualty of a war they hadn't fully understood? The sky was filled with The sounds of destruction, and yet, there was an unsettling calm in Kalia's chest. She had summoned the most dangerous force in the galaxy, and now she had to face the consequences of that decision. Whether she liked it or not, the Deathworlders had arrived and nothing would ever be the same again. Unleashing the furried battle on the planet's surface escalated with terrifying speed. The alien forces, though powerful, were nothing compared to the sheer might of the Deathworlder fleet. The sky above was filled with massive warships, their powerful engines emitting waves of energy as they unloaded their devastating payloads. Destruction rippled across the landscape, cities crumbled, fields of crops turned to ash, and the air itself seemed to warp with the force of each blast. The Deathworlders were not just fighting, they were annihilating. Kalia stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic map of the battlefield. The view was filled with the harsh, fiery glow of explosions. What had once been vibrant cities were now burning ruins. There was no distinction between friend and foe. The Deathworlders treated everyone the same. Sweeping across the land like an unstoppable storm, Captain, one of the officers, called out, his voice trembling. The Deathworlders are pushing forward. Their ground forces have taken control of all key strategic points. The enemy is in full retreat. Kalia barely registered the words. The battle was progressing far too quickly to decisively. Her species had never experienced such overwhelming power. The Deathworlders were far more than conquerors. They were forces of nature, indifferent to the lives they destroyed, focused solely on the hunt. We've lost communication with our remaining defense forces, another officer added, anxiety seeping into their voice. There's no more hope of organizing any form of resistance. Kalia's heart sank. Her species had asked for help, and they had received it, though not in the way they had imagined. The Deathworlders were here not to protect or save. They were here to erase the remnants of her world and rebuild it in their image. A new transmission flickered on the screen, and Kalia stiffened. It was from Captain Gur. His face appeared, cold and stoic as ever, but now there was a gleam of finality in his eyes. Commander Kalia, Ngur's voice came through, as commanding as before. The battle is nearly over. We have wiped out your enemies. There is no threat remaining on your planet. Your people are safe. For now, Kalia's mind raced. Safe? You've destroyed everything, she exclaimed. What kind of help is this? You've crushed us too. The ground. Ngur's expression didn't change. I told you, Commander. You wanted power. You wanted to survive. Now, you will learn what true power is. The galaxy does not have room for weaklings, and you will be part of something greater. You will survive, but on our terms. He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in before he continued. The enemy is no longer a threat. What remains of your species will be spared, but you will be ruled. The Deathworlder fleet will be your new masters. Do not mistake our mercy for weakness. The transmission ended abruptly. Kalia stood motionless, staring at the blank screen. Her world, her people, their entire way of life had been decimated in a matter of hours. It was clear now the Deathworlders were not the benevolent rescuers they had hoped for. They had no interest in alliances or peace. They were here to claim the galaxy, one species at a time. The room was silent, save for the distant rumble of more explosions shaking the foundations of the citadel. Kalia knew that this was just the beginning of her people's new reality. The Deathworlders had not come to liberate them. They had come to control them. As the Deathworlder fleet continued its march across the planet, the alien soldiers who had once been in command of the defenses were now surrendering, their weapons and resistance falling to the might of the Deathworlders. There was no fight left in them, not against this terrifying force. The survivors, including Kalia, watched as their cities burned and their cultures crumbled. The Deathworlders moved with cold precision, rounding up the few remaining leaders and placing them under strict control. But even in the face of such overwhelming destruction, Kalia could not escape the chilling truth. She had called for help. Yes, but the price had been far higher than she could have ever imagined. The Deathworlders were not here to preserve life or create allies. They were here to reshape the galaxy in their image. And now, her species was a part of that plan. In the following days, as the Deathworlders established their dominance over the planet, Kalia was summoned to meet Captain Gur once again. The command center had been transformed. What had once been a place of leadership was now a stark, cold headquarters for the Deathworlders. The walls were adorned with the symbols of the Deathworlder fleet, a constant reminder that her people were now subjugated to their will. As Kalia walked into the room, she noticed that other alien leaders were already present, their faces marked with fear and uncertainty. The Deathworlders had made their presence known, and they were not asking for permission. They were demanding control. Gur stood before a large table, his back straight and his eyes scanning the room as the leaders filed in. His cold, emotionless gaze met Kalia's, and for a brief moment, There was a flicker of something like amusement in his eyes. "Commander Kalia," he said, his voice as sharp and unforgiving as ever, "you have been spared, as have the rest of your leaders, but understand this, your world, your people, your future now belongs to us." Kalia swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The once proud leaders of her species were now nothing more than pawns in a game. They could not win. Magar continued, "We do not give second chances. You will rebuild this planet as we see fit. You will provide us with resources and labor. And in return, we will allow your people to survive on our terms." Kalia wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew there was no point. The Deathworlders had already claimed their victory, and her species was now nothing more than a tool for their conquest. What had started as a desperate call for help had turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. The Deathworlders had shown no mercy, no compassion, only cold, ruthless efficiency. Kalia realized that the galaxy, once so full of possibilities, was now a place of darkness. The Deathworlders were a force that could not be stopped, and her people, despite their survival, were now a part of something far larger and far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived and they had reshaped the future of the galaxy with their own hands. The aftermath and the true price of help. The alien species, battered and broken, watched as their world was reshaped. The cities that had once been symbols of culture and achievement now lay in ruins. The Deathworlders, cold and calculating, moved through the rubble like predators, ensuring that nothing was left of the old world. For the first time in their history, the alien leaders realized that their survival had come at a far greater cost than they had imagined. Kalia, standing in the shattered remains of her capital city, could not help but feel the weight of their decision. She had called for help, but in doing so, she had opened the door to a force that could not be bargained with. The Deathworlders were not just conquerors, they were an unstoppable force of nature. And now, her people were forever bound to them. The Deathworlder fleet had taken control of the remaining infrastructure, establishing their dominance across every corner of the planet. The alien population, once proud and independent, was now relegated to a mere shadow of its former self. The survivors were forced into labor camps, rebuilding the world under the watchful eyes of the Deathworlders. It wasn't just the cities that had been destroyed, it was their very identity. The Deathworlders were methodical, tearing down anything that reminded the planet's people of their former glory. Kalia stood in the command center of the Deathworlders' newly established headquarters. It was a cold, sterile place, a far cry from the warm, bustling environment her species had once enjoyed. The walls were adorned with the Deathworlder insignia, their dark, oppressive symbols stamped everywhere. Captain Gur entered the room, his presence dominating the space. He walked with purpose, his every step echoing in the hollow silence of the command center. His cold eyes locked with Kalia's as he approached, a silent acknowledgement that she was now one of the last leaders of her species. "You've seen the progress," Gur said, his voice as devoid of emotion as ever. "Your world is being remade in our image. The last remnants of your race will serve us. Those who resist will be dealt with swiftly." Kalia felt a knot tighten in her chest. This wasn't the help they had called for. The Deathworlders had arrived with the sole purpose of subjugating her people. Their methods were harsh, their goals far from merciful, but now, in the wake of this devastation, Kalia couldn't see a way forward. What was left of her species could only exist under the thumb of the Deathworlders. "You call this survival?" Kalia asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. "This is not survival, this is oppression. You've destroyed everything we were." Gur's lips curled into a thin smile. "You were weak. This is what survival looks like. Your species will now learn what true power means." Kalia turned away from him, her eyes scanning the desolate horizon outside the window. The city, once bustling with life, was now a hollow shell, the remnants of buildings collapsing under the weight of Deathworlder forces. She had tried to save her people, but now, it seemed, they were beyond saving. The very essence of who they had been was slipping away, replaced by an unnatural, cold existence under their new masters. Outside, the workers labored tirelessly, constructing new facilities and rebuilding what the Deathworlders had deemed worthy of preserving. There were no smiles, no laughter, only the sound of tools scraping against metal, the clatter of heavy machinery as the survivors were forced into a life of servitude. The Deathworlders had no need for compassion, they had no desire to restore what had been lost. They had only come to create something new, and it was a world where the alien species would never be the same again. As the days passed, Kalia's resolve began to crumble. The Deathworlders were relentless, they demanded total compliance, and those who hesitated were punished harshly. There were whispers among the survivors, a faint glimmer of rebellion, but it was quickly silenced. The Deathworlders had a way of breaking spirits, of snuffing out any hope before it could grow. They didn't just fight wars, they destroyed entire civilizations, molding them into something they could control. Kalia's heart sank as she watched the workers toil beneath the watchful eyes of the Deathworlder soldiers. Her people had been shattered, the very essence of their culture and identity had been erased. What remained was a pale imitation, a people bound to serve the Deathworlders. But even in the darkest of times, there was a spark of resistance, however. Smalls a few of the alien leaders, those who still retained their will to fight, had begun to speak in secret. Kalia could hear their voices in the night, rallying what little strength remained in the survivors. They spoke of rebellion, of reclaiming their planet, of standing up against the Deathworlders. Kalia didn't know if it was hope or desperation that kept her moving. But a part of her knew that if they didn't act soon, her species would be lost forever. The Deathworlders had shown them no mercy, no path to freedom. But somewhere in the ruins, in the hearts of the survivors, there was a spark of defiance. If they were to survive, they would need to do more than rebuild their world, they would need to take it back from the Deathworlders. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of a new empire, one built on fear and domination. The Deathworlders had claimed victory, but the true battle was far from over. Kalia knew that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always a chance for rebellion, a chance to reclaim what had been lost. The question was whether her people had the strength to rise against their merciless masters, or if they would forever remain pawns in the Deathworlders' game. But as Kalia looked out over the desolation of her home, she felt a flicker of something, a quiet, determined resolve. Her species may have been broken, but they were not done. The fight for their world had just begun.